It began without warning, a sudden and violent disruption of the natural order. The signs were subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but they quickly escalated into a full-blown catastrophe. One moment, Yellowstone National Park was a picture of serene beauty, a vast expanse of untouched wilderness teeming with life. The air was crisp and clean, the sky a brilliant blue, and the landscape a tapestry of vibrant colors. Geysers erupted as they had for centuries, sending plumes of scalding water high into the air. These natural wonders were a testament to the park's unique geological activity, a reminder of the powerful forces at play beneath the surface. Bison grazed peacefully in the meadows, their massive forms silhouetted against the backdrop of towering mountains and lush forests. They were an integral part of the ecosystem, a symbol of the park's untamed spirit. Tourists snapped photos, capturing the breathtaking scenery and the unique wildlife encounters. They marveled at the park's natural wonders, unaware of the impending doom that lurked just beneath their feet. Totally unaware of the sleeping giant beneath their feet, the Yellowstone supervolcano, one of the most powerful and potentially destructive forces on Earth. Its presence was a constant threat, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Then the Earth shuddered, a low rumble that grew into a violent tremor. The ground beneath their feet began to shake, and the air filled with a sense of unease. A deafening roar split the sky, a sound that echoed through the mountains and valleys. It was the sound of the earth unleashing its fury, a primal scream that signaled the beginning of the end. The ground buckled and heaved, as if some monstrous creature was struggling to break free from its subterranean prison. Cracks appeared in the earth, widening into gaping fissures that swallowed everything in their path. A column of fire and ash erupted from the heart of the caldera, a terrifying display of raw power. The eruption was instantaneous and cataclysmic, a force of nature that dwarfed anything humanity had ever witnessed. It shot miles into the atmosphere, blotting out the sun and plunging the surrounding area into darkness. The ash cloud spread rapidly, carried by the wind, threatening to engulf everything in its path. Molten rock, rivers of fire, superheated gas, poisonous and suffocating, and pulverized rock spewed forth with just unimaginable force, a deadly cocktail of destruction that rained down upon the landscape. The eruption was unlike anything humanity had ever witnessed, a true super-eruption that dwarfed even the most devastating volcanic events in recorded history. Yellowstone, the supervolcano, had awakened, unleashing its pent-up fury upon an unsuspecting world. The consequences would be catastrophic, reshaping the landscape and altering the course of human history. The immediate blast zone was obliterated, reduced to a barren wasteland of ash and rock. Nothing could survive the initial onslaught of heat and pressure. Everything within 100 miles was vaporized instantly, leaving behind only a desolate expanse of scorched earth. The landscape was unrecognizable, a testament to the sheer power of the eruption. Towns like West Yellowstone, Montana ceased to exist, buried beneath tons of ash and debris. Their inhabitants were caught completely off guard, with no chance of escape. The force of the eruption was felt for thousands of miles, sending shock waves that shattered windows and toppled buildings. The ground trembled even hundreds of miles away, a constant reminder of the devastation that had occurred. It was a scene of unimaginable destruction, a nightmare come to life. The scale of the disaster was so vast that it was difficult to comprehend. The American West was changed forever in a matter of minutes, transformed into a desolate landscape of ash and ruin. The eruption of Yellowstone had ushered in a new era, an era of uncertainty and fear. The initial blast was just the beginning, a cataclysmic event unleashing forces beyond human comprehension. It was a harbinger of the devastation to come, a signal that the world as they knew it was about to change forever. The eruption's energy ripped through the earth, setting off a chain reaction of destruction. Pyroclastic flows, rivers of superheated gas and ash were unleashed from the volcano's maw. These weren't mere streams of lava, they were raging torrents of destruction, carrying unimaginable heat and force. They raced across the landscape, an unstoppable wave of incineration. The ground trembled beneath their advance, and the air crackled with energy. They moved at hundreds of miles per hour, a speed that defied escape. Nothing could outrun them. No living thing could withstand their searing touch. The flows were a force of nature at its most brutal, and unforgiving. Forests were incinerated in an instant, reduced to ash and embers in the blink of an eye. The once lush landscapes were transformed into barren wastelands, scorched and lifeless. Rivers and lakes boiled away, their waters vaporizing into clouds of scalding steam. The very essence of life was extinguished, as the volcanic heat consumed everything in its path. The air itself turned to fire, an invisible inferno that choked the lungs and seared the skin. Breathing became an act of agony, and survival seemed impossible. Cities like Bozeman and Billings, Montana were engulfed, their skylines disappearing behind a curtain of ash and smoke. The vibrant communities were now facing an existential threat. Buildings crumbled under the weight of falling ash, their roofs collapsing and walls buckling. The infrastructure of civilization was being systematically destroyed. Streets became rivers of molten rock, fiery torrents that consumed everything in their path. The familiar urban landscape was transformed into a hellish panorama. People caught in the open had no chance, their fates sealed by the overwhelming power of the eruption. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The lucky ones died instantly, spared the prolonged suffering of those who survived the initial blast. Others faced a more agonizing fate, struggling to breathe in the toxic air and enduring unimaginable burns. Beyond the immediate blast zone, a rain of ash began to fall, a silent but deadly precipitation that blanketed the landscape. It was a constant reminder of the catastrophe that had befallen them. It spread eastward, carried by the prevailing winds, a grey shroud that blotted out the sun and choked the life from the land. The ash cloud was a symbol of the disaster's far-reaching consequences. Denver, Colorado found itself shrouded in darkness. The once vibrant city plunged into an eerie twilight. The ash fall turned day into night, casting a pall over the entire region. The weight of the ash caused roofs to collapse, homes and businesses succumbing to the relentless pressure. The structural integrity of the city was compromised, leaving its inhabitants vulnerable. Air travel was grounded across the continent, the skies rendered impassable by the dense ash clouds. The world was cut off from the affected region, hindering rescue efforts and exacerbating the crisis. The American West was cut off from the rest of the world, isolated by the volcanic devastation. Communication lines were down, roads were blocked, and the region was left to fend for itself in the face of unimaginable adversity. The ashfall began subtly, almost like a light dusting of snow, but it quickly intensified, becoming a relentless torrent of gritty, grey particles. The sky, once a familiar blue, was now obscured by a thick, suffocating cloud. It piled up on streets, blanketing everything in a thick, suffocating layer. The fine ash seeped into every crack and crevice, coating surfaces with a film that was impossible to escape. Cars, once symbols of freedom and mobility, were rendered useless, buried under the heavy weight of the ash. Their windshields were opaque, their engines choked, their presence a stark reminder of the paralyzed city. And homes, our sanctuaries, were not spared. Roofs groaned and buckled under the immense weight, threatening to collapse and crush everything beneath. The ash infiltrated every room, turning interiors into dusty grey landscapes. It clogged engines and choked air filters, bringing transportation to a standstill. The abrasive ash wreaked havoc on machinery, grinding gears and causing irreparable damage. It turned day into night, plunging the world into an eerie darkness. Streetlights flickered uselessly, unable to penetrate the dense cloud of ash that blotted out the sun. In the Midwest, the heartland of America, cities like Omaha and Kansas City, vibrant hubs of commerce and culture, were buried under a thick blanket of ash, their skylines disappearing under the oppressive grey. The once familiar landmarks were now ghostly silhouettes, barely visible through the swirling ash. Visibility was reduced to just a few feet, making navigation treacherous and disorienting. The world shrank to a small grey circle, isolating individuals in a sea of ash. Breathing became difficult, the fine particles irritating lungs and airways, even impossible for some, especially the elderly and those with pre-existing respiratory conditions. Hospitals quickly filled with patients struggling to breathe, their lungs overwhelmed by the ash. The weight of the ash overwhelmed infrastructure, pushing it to its breaking point. Power lines snapped under the strain, plunging entire cities into darkness. Water systems failed as pipes burst and reservoirs became contaminated with ash. Transportation ground to a halt, stranding people far from home and cutting off vital supply lines. Highways became impassable, littered with abandoned vehicles. The delicate web of modern civilization began to unravel, thread by thread, as essential services collapsed. Emergency services were overwhelmed, struggling to cope with the sheer scale of the disaster. Hospitals were flooded with injured and sick, their resources stretched to the breaking point. Doctors and nurses worked tirelessly, battling against the rising tide of patients. Food and water supplies dwindled, leading to shortages and desperation. Panic began to set in as people realized the gravity of the situation. The Midwest, once the breadbasket of America, was now a disaster zone, its fertile fields buried under a thick layer of ash. Millions were displaced, their homes uninhabitable, forced to flee in search of safety and shelter. The death toll climbed with each passing hour, a grim reminder of the volcano's devastating power. And, honestly, the worst was yet to come, as the volcano continued to spew ash, and the full extent of the damage remained unknown. The United States, once a global superpower, was brought to its knees. The government struggled to respond to the scale of the disaster. Communication networks were down. Transportation systems were crippled. The military, stretched thin by years of war, was ill-equipped to handle a crisis of this magnitude. The president addressed the nation from a bunker deep beneath the White House. His words offered little comfort. The country was facing its greatest challenge ever. He urged calm and unity, but, his pleas were drowned out by the growing chaos. Riots erupted in major cities. Looting and violence became commonplace. People fought over dwindling supplies of food, water, and medicine. The social fabric of America was tearing apart. The land of the free and the home of the brave was now a land of fear and desperation. The eruption of Yellowstone had consequences far beyond the borders of the United States. The ash cloud, carried by global wind patterns, spread across the planet. It darkened the skies, blocking out the sun. Temperatures began to plummet. Global agriculture was devastated. Crops failed. Livestock perished. The world faced a food shortage of unimaginable proportions. Famine loomed on the horizon. Billions faced starvation. The interconnectedness of the global food system meant that no nation was immune. The cooling effect of the ash cloud triggered a volcanic winter. Average global temperatures dropped by several degrees. Snow fell in summer. Lakes and rivers froze over. The delicate balance of the Earth's climate system had been disrupted, with potentially catastrophic consequences. As conditions deteriorated, millions fled their homes in search of safety and survival. The largest mass migration in human history was underway. Borders were overrun. Nations collapsed under the strain. People moved in vast, desperate hordes. They traveled by foot, by car, by boat, any way they could. They carried what few possessions they could salvage. They were driven by hope, by fear, by the primal instinct to survive. The lucky ones found refuge in countries less affected by the disaster. Others were not so fortunate. They perished along the way, victims of starvation, disease, or violence. The world had become a brutal Darwinian struggle for survival. The global economy, already fragile before the eruption, collapsed completely. Stock markets crashed. Currencies became worthless. Trade ground to a halt. The interconnectedness of the global financial system, once a source of prosperity, now amplified the disaster. Governments around the world were overwhelmed. They lacked the resources to deal with the scale of the crisis. Many simply ceased to function. The international order, already strained by rising nationalism and geopolitical tensions, crumbled. The world was leaderless, rudderless, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The old rules no longer applied. The future was uncertain, terrifying, and very, very dark. The uncertain future. In the years after the eruption, humanity struggled to survive. The planet was a very different place. The climate was colder, harsher, food was scarce, disease was rampant, the global population had been decimated. Some clung to the hope that things would eventually return to normal, but the world they once knew was gone forever. The eruption of Yellowstone had ushered in a new era, an era of hardship, uncertainty, and profound change. Would humanity rise from the ashes, stronger and more resilient, or would this be the beginning of a new dark age, a slow and painful decline into oblivion? The answer, like the future itself, remained shrouded in ash and uncertainty. The eruption of Yellowstone was just the beginning. The story of what happened next, of how humanity faced its greatest challenge, is a story yet to be written. It is a story of survival, of resilience, of the enduring human spirit. But it is also a story of loss, of sacrifice, and of the difficult choices that must be made in the face of unimaginable adversity. What do you think happens next? How would you survive in a world forever changed?